morning and welcome to Morning Movie News, where we're losing more movie folk to television. Yes, today's top stories deal with two such defections. Then we have an encouraging development in the pursuit of justice for the death of Sarah Jones down on that Midnight Rider set in Georgia, and then a very interesting and unique viewer question. So let's get started. And as you can see, our first defection is Christopher Walken, but I can forgive him for what he's defecting to, and that is NBC's upcoming live broadcast of Peter Pan. And he's going to play none other than Captain Hook. This was NBC's big announcement over the weekend at a television conference that was going on. All the networks and cable networks were making announcements, and this was NBC's, or one of them. And I think it was very cleverly timed. And they promised that Christopher Walken would not only sing as Captain Hook, obviously because it's a musical, but would tap dance as well. So that's something I know I can't miss. And it was going to be an even more exciting announcement, but it didn't work out. But they were going to say that Kristen Bell, the voice of Anna in Frozen, would be playing the role of Peter, obviously Peter Pan. Now, some of you might be saying, but Peter Pan is a boy. But if you're familiar with the history of the Peter Pan play and musical, for a long time, until actually the Walt Disney version, it was played by a woman. Because, I think at that time, perhaps child actors weren't as sophisticated as they are today, and they felt that a woman could portray a young boy, of course, more convincingly than a grown man. So Mary Martin, for instance, is, I believe, the most famous female Peter Pan. The role was actually considered hers for quite some time, until I think the Disney version came along, and I think kind of wiped the memory of her away. Now, we've had a couple of Peter Pans since then. Warner Brothers is actually working on their own Peter Pan, Levi Miller, a little boy, incidentally, coming up in 2015. But Mary Martin, interestingly, did this role live for NBC. That's the history I was talking about, back in 1955, a year after I believe she debuted on Broadway in the role. And 65 million people tuned in for that, which is far more than the 18.6 who tuned in for The Sound of Music. So you can see why NBC would pick Peter Pan to be their adaptation here. And I think it's very interesting, mentioning Warner Brothers, perhaps they should be a little concerned that Peter Pan's going to be getting so much exposure, pretty close to the release date of their big Peter Pan extravaganza, which stars also Hugh Jackman as some pirate named Blackbeard, that Levi Miller is Peter Pan, and Garrett Hedlund is a young Captain Hook. Before he and Pan are enemies, will fight together. Also, the interesting thing about Kristen Bell, by the way, if you're wondering why it didn't work out, is because she has a conflict with her schedule on House of Lies. Because this is a live broadcast, they need to do rehearsals, and it needs obviously to be filmed live, they can't really get around someone else's schedule. So they said they tried very hard to make it work out. And I think Kristen Bell, this must be very disappointing for her, as well as fans, because I think this would have been a perfect role for her. I think she'd make a great Peter. And it would be a great way for her to capitalize off the success of Frozen. Of course, Josh Gad has done quite well off of Frozen, but the two female leads, ironically, and Jonathan Groff also, Idina Menzel, although as we speculated before I went on vacation, they might be crafting Enchanted 2 around her. So Idina Menzel might have something in the works. But where's Kristen Bell's big win or big reward off of Frozen? It has yet to materialize. And I think this would have been it. Now, speaking of rewards, why is this such a good idea for Christopher Walken? I think that he is a phenomenal dancer. If you have not seen the music video he did with Spike Jonze, a weapon of choice for Fatboy Slim, where he's tap dancing and dancing around a hotel lobby, go watch it right now. In fact, I'll put a link down in the video description, but sometimes I know I forget to do that. If I haven't, just type in Christopher Walken, Fatboy Slim, and it'll come up immediately. It's a phenomenal piece of filmmaking and, a performance from Walken. He's a great song and dance man. I believe he has had a lot of experience in that area. So I think he's going to really deliver. I think it seems like it'll be funny to watch, and Christopher Walken, of course, is inherently funny, but don't fool yourself into thinking he's going to make a joke out of himself. He will perform and be phenomenal in the role, I suspect. And while I didn't watch Sound of Music because I have too much love for the original film with Julie Andrews and Christopher Plummer, which, by the way, Christopher Plummer's not a big fan of, but at least he kind of keeps that to himself. I talked recently about the South Korean filmmaker Bong Joon-ho really taking, pot shots at The Sound of Music, I thought, in an inappropriate manner. But, it is a classic. And if you've never seen it, by the way, go rent it on Blu-ray. The Blu-ray transfer is phenomenal. And you watch it on a really good screen, quality television screen, you'll just be blown away. It's not boring. It's a wonderful piece of filmmaking. So I didn't want to watch Sound of Music, but a lot of people did. But this is where it gets interesting. And a lot of people watched Carrie Underwood, you know, the American Idol winner, who this was a big acting gig for her, and they tuned in to kind of see her fail, which she did. And a lot of people ended up hate watching The Sound of Music, which could be quite entertaining. It was a big social media phenomenon when it was on. It was on live, obviously, and so everybody was tweeting it and having a great time making fun of Carrie Underwood basically just trip and fall on her face. So you have to wonder if people will get as big a kick out of watching someone do a spectacular job in a role. You know, Christopher Walken, as I said, is not going to fall on his face, but I think he's quirky enough, and I think he's going to make this role his own, that perhaps will be you can swap out the entertainment value there. So I'm curious, did you watch The Sound of Music live, by the way, on NBC last year? And will you watch Christopher Walken in this live broadcast of Peter Pan coming up? It's December 4th, maybe 5th, by the way. They say they needed the talent through December 5th. Maybe that's for promotion, but I believe the original date that they announced for this Peter Pan live broadcast was December 4th, 2014. So I'm curious if you'll watch that. And I also wonder what you think of a female Peter Pan. And do you think Kristen Bell really missed an opportunity here? So that's the first story of the day. And also, oh yes, what do you think of Warner Brothers? Do you think this is problematic for their Peter Pan, which of course, as I believe, is about to start filming or has started filming, and is set, of course, to come out opposite Ant-Man in summer 2015. All right, so the second story of the day is our other defection to television, and that's Robert Zemeckis. Now, of course, Robert Zemeckis has not had an easy time of late. He, of course, is a phenomenal filmmaker. Not only did he jumped into the scene with the Back to the Future trilogy. Steven Spielberg produced those, but then he really made a name for himself with films like Forrest Gump, becoming a big Oscar contender, and a fantastic filmmaker. But then he kind of went down the rabbit hole with motion capture animation. I just referenced it actually on Movie Math yesterday, that it must really annoy him to see this motion capture success for the Apes franchise, whereas he took such a nosedive that not only did he have to abandon all of his efforts with, I believe, Image Movers was the name of the company, but it kind of really took a toll on his career. He tried to come back with Flight, you know, the Denzel Washington film, I think 2 years ago or so, and while I think that was a well-crafted film, it just wasn't the contender that I think Zemeckis, it was clear he couldn't jump right back in, obviously. So he's decided maybe to see if he can go the television route, which so many people are doing these days. Now, you might recall he's done some television, which some of you actually might be typing right now. He executive produced Tales from the Crypt, but that was an executive producer gig. He wasn't really heavily involved in that. Often, if you're wondering, an executive producer, the difference between an executive producer and a producer, is a producer does the actual producing. They do the nitty-gritty, the supervision, they make the deals, etc. An executive producer is someone who allows the project to happen. They make a phone call. They put their name on it, which is often just enough. And that's how they get an executive producer credit, for just kind of lending their prestige to get the film up a hill, you know, or up maybe sometimes multiple hills. So that's really what Zemeckis was doing there. But now he's going to work with Paramount and really trying to develop some television series. And it's just, another, as I said, another defection, and really showing, you know, perhaps because of the death of the mid-range pick in film, that this kind of talent needs to go to television. Now, sometimes they bounce back, and they often want to bounce back. That's often the goal. Billy Bob Thornton, I'm sure, who I've said many a time now, who's really impressed in Fargo, has no interest in staying on television. He wants to use that as a trampoline to bounce back into movies. And he might. He's in, of course, The Judge coming up later this year opposite Robert Downey Jr. And I'm much more interested to see his performance after seeing him in Fargo. And, of course, he got, I believe, an Emmy nomination for his work. So that's going to also up his, you know, Hollywood profile as well. So I think Zemeckis is looking to do the same thing. I don't think but I don't think this is his first choice. I think he would have liked to go back to movies, and I think he's really trying to search to redefine himself. And I think, you know, when you have too many flops under your belt, it's hard for people to remember the good times. You know, Hollywood's, it's a cyclical town, but, you know, I mean, I think they have a poor memory as well. Except when they're doing their promotional campaigns, then they remember all the awesome movies you did and list them to try and get people to come into the theater. But I think Zemeckis is a very talented filmmaker. But, you know, it's interesting. Some of you have said that you miss the old Spielberg, that he's gone from making really exciting action movies to moving on to this more, you know, Oscar bait content. I loved Lincoln, but I know a lot of people didn't. And I think Zemeckis might have had the same transformation. He went from making really exciting movies like Back to the Future, and now, of course, things worked quite well for Forrest Gump, but, I don't know why maybe he doesn't consider returning to his real roots, and that's Back to the Future and films like that. But I'm curious, what do you think? Do you think this is a good move by Zemeckis? And do you think that Hollywood, the film division, should be at all concerned with all this talent going over to TV? Or do you think the line is becoming so blurred at this point that it's not quite the same? I think it's blockbusters versus mid-range movies. I think it's interesting. I think it's the spectacle. That's where you're starting to see a division between movies and TV. It's fascinating development, and I think we're not out of the woods yet. That's the two big transitions going on in Hollywood right now. The threat of television, and also, I think, the global industry. All right, so let's move on to this. I think, as I said, it's an encouraging development in the pursuit of justice for Sarah Jones's death. But, of course, nothing's too cheery about this story because nothing's going to bring Sarah Jones back. But I'm glad to see this story hasn't been swept under the rug. That was something, I believe I called it to your attention before. There was a documentary made about a crew death on Pleasantville, and there was a lot of, movement to change the business practices of Hollywood to be more safe for crew members, but it eventually was quieted down and went away and kind of swept under the rug by, tragically and disgustingly, some of the unions, working in tandem with the studios because they're always worried about that bottom line. But it looks like the Sarah Jones situation isn't going to go away. And of course, there was that horrible death on, John Landis as the director of the Twilight Zone film, where people were decapitated, 2 child actors and an adult actor by a helicopter crash. And there were no repercussions for that gentleman. He continued to go on and make movies. I mean, he was somewhat blacklisted within Hollywood, but he never saw any jail time. But it looks like that might not be the case for those involved in this Midnight Rider film. Now, right on July 3rd, actually just as I was going on vacation, so I missed that story, so bringing it up now, but there's been a development. They were charged, the filmmakers, including director Randall Miller and producer Jody Savin. I believe they're married, actually. And some of the other people involved in the film have been charged with involuntary manslaughter and criminal trespassing. And in Georgia, Atlanta, Georgia, I think that's 10 years for involuntary manslaughter. They could get that that could be what they're sentencing. And yesterday, the reason this is a developing story is that Randall Miller and Jody Savin, the director and producer, did turn themselves in voluntarily to the police in Atlanta. They were booked and then they were released on bail. So this case is moving forward and criminal charges have been brought. A lot of you, for instance, when we were talking about Bryan Singer yesterday, talked about it was a shame and somewhat suspicious that controversy and scandal and accusation was playing out in a civil court instead of a criminal court. So I'm glad to see that in the case of Sarah Jones, this is in a criminal court of law. There needs to be repercussions for not taking good care of the people who are trusting you, not just with their livelihood, but in this case their lives. And I think if you've done some research on the Sarah Jones situation and what was done, it's just appalling. And I don't think that Randall Miller and Jody Savin deserve to get away scot-free. So I'm glad, kudos to the Justice Department and the Police Department in Georgia and Atlanta, Georgia, and also the District Attorney's Office for not letting this go away. And perhaps because this didn't take place in California, this didn't take place in Hollywood, that's one of the reasons it's not going away. That you have another state saying, the movie business, there's a lot of production going on in Atlanta, but you're like, this isn't integral to us, it's not our whole identity as a state, and we just aren't willing to let this go by. And so maybe that might be one of the good things about having so much production leave California, which is a whole other story in itself because of incentives, etc. But so write down below what you think of that, and if you agree that Randall Miller and Jody Savin deserve jail time for the death of Sarah Jones. All right, so let's move on to today's viewer question, which as I said, was quite unique. It's from Emma Maycock, and Emma says, "Hi Grace, smiley face. I'm hoping you pick my question. Love your channel and watch your show every day." Thank you, Emma. I really appreciate that. So she says her question is about cosmetic surgery versus prosthetic makeup. When actors and actresses have dramatic and noticeable cosmetic surgery like Nicole Kidman, Jennifer Grey, Megan Fox, Meg Ryan, Burt Reynolds, and Michael Douglas, for some reason their careers plummet. I feel as an audience member I do not take the actors seriously. I become distracted by the actor's face throughout the film, thinking she or he looks different. You and me both, Emma. Not paying attention to story, plotline, or dialogue. However, when actors have prosthetic work done, such as Channing Tatum in Foxcatcher, Joseph Gordon-Levitt in Looper to look more like Bruce Willis, Nicole Kidman, her nose in The Hours, Charlize Theron in Monster, Heath Ledger in The Joker, I am captivated by their performance and the character they play. I know this is not a permanent fixture to the actor's face. What do you think, Grace, she asks? And, why is there a difference? And I think that's a really great question, Emma, and I think it really speaks to why the work is done and if it's permanent. Now, of course, when someone messes up their face, it's hard not to just be like, why did you do that? And it's interesting, your list that you put, Emma, here goes a little all over the place. Because you have actors who have gotten cosmetic surgery because they fear their march of time. Because, of course, an actor's, their whole instrument, I guess you could say, is their face. They express emotion. But it's also, their moneymaker. And in Hollywood, for a very long time, I think maybe it's changing a little bit, but, still it's a big problem. They focus a lot on youth. So actors, in a misguided attempt to hang on to their youth, will go and hack their face up and, they're talked into thinking they look great, and they don't. And, they can't work again. Meg Ryan, I think, is a great example of that. Helen Mirren, though, I think Helen Mirren's got a few nip and tucks, but she's done a great job of aging gracefully and is considered still quite attractive and has no problem getting work. And so I think, I don't think actors should be as afraid of aging as they are, and they should realize that audiences aren't as against aging as perhaps Hollywood has perceived, or maybe they aren't today. But anyway, but then you have people like Jennifer Grey and Megan Fox. Now those people changed their faces. Jennifer Grey, I think, would have had trouble getting work anyway. The real star out of Dirty Dancing was Patrick Swayze. But Megan Fox actually rebuilt her entire face before she got the Transformers roles. And so cosmetic surgery worked for her at first. It's really a fascinating case of someone literally changing the way they look. But then I think because she continued not to get work after Michael Bay dropped her and wasn't getting work, I think she felt, well, maybe plastic surgery will work for me again, and she went too far. I think it's there's a lot of rejection in the movie business, and a lot of actors have pointed out that you just can't take it personally. It's often a business decision that has nothing to do with you in particular. But it's hard not to take it personally, and so you'll see a lot of actors go, well, maybe if I look just a little bit different here, this was different here. I think you've seen the same thing happen to Lindsay Lohan. They go, well, Lindsay Lohan goes, well, the reason I'm not getting work isn't because I'm uninsurable and I never show up on time and don't know my lines and have drug problems. It's clearly because, my face isn't perfect. I think it's just a desperate and sad attempt to try and get to fix what's not working, but not understanding why it's not working, if you see what I'm saying. And Burt Reynolds, of course, not wanting to look older. Michael Douglas, I think, is also, like Helen Mirren, done pretty good work with his plastic surgery. Robert Redford, I know there are different ways. You cannot touch the face, but you can touch up your chin just to make yourself look a little bit better. It's an interesting situation. But I think that the reason that's distracting to you, Emma, is because those are decisions that are made not for a specific role, but for a career. So it takes you out of the movie because it reminds you that this person is an actor playing a role. You go, okay, oh, I see. Even though you're pretending you're someone here, I know what's really going on. You're afraid you're not getting enough work. I'm concerned for you. What are you doing to yourself? But when someone dons prosthetics for a role, they're trying to disappear into the role. So they want, and you understand that. You're like, oh, Channing Tatum doesn't want me to see Channing Tatum. He wants me to see this tragic wrestler. And this is going to come off when the role is done. Channing Tatum hasn't messed up his face. He's doing this for the role, for my entertainment, to better sell this performance, and which is for me, for my benefit. Also probably maybe get an Oscar nomination, but still, that's what the situation is. One pulls you further into the movie, one pulls you out of it because it's reminding you that this is an actor who's making business decisions with their face, medically. So that's why I think the difference is, and that's why I think sometimes you can look away and not. However, I have to tell you, in Looper, as I mentioned in my review, he didn't look anything like Bruce Willis to me, and I was often sitting there going, what happens in the passage of time to make Joseph Gordon-Levitt's plasticky-looking face look more like Bruce Willis? I don't get it. So prosthetics, of course, are still a difficult art as well. And that's why you're seeing it go a little bit more towards the motion capture situation with Andy Serkis. But we'll see. Maybe in the future there will be digital prosthetics, which could be even more convincing. And I think that's maybe a fascinating development in the future. So I hope that gives you some insight, Emma, into why you think, why sometimes you're distracted and sometimes you're not. And I'd love it if everybody else, tuned in and gave their thoughts on cosmetic surgery for business purposes and for prosthetics for a role. Thank you so much for tuning in. That's today's morning movie news. Write down below what you think of today's top 3 stories and the viewer question, and anything you'd like to see covered tomorrow and any questions that you might have. Thanks for watching. Bye.